Boom!
From the 305 to the 303, this is TCSP. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Dr. Brian and the Casually Serious Band.
Welcome to the Casually Serious Podcast. This is the Mixtape, Rockin with the Classics. Yes. What is going on, ladies and gentlemen? I do a fair amount of air drumming to that. Ken, how about yourself? As a drummer, do you not do some air drumming without a good old riff?
I do, but I usually bang on the desk, but it's really not conducive of microphones and stuff to be banging on a desk. So
I tell you what, life hack, in case you didn't notice, when that clip is being played, if you look down on the bottom left of your screen, your mic will be muted. So you can do that all you want. Just make sure you get it done before we get back.
Yeah, anyway, okay. Ken, I'll work on timing that.
Welcome to the Mixtape, Rockin with the Classics, man. If you could not tell by the description we put out on the videos and the obvious things popping up in your face right now, yes, we are talking about classic rock today. Brian Smith, what is up, dude? Thanks for joining the comments section. We've got about 10 or 12 people on hanging out right now, man. This is awesome, dude. Ken, before we get started, man, how's it going, man? How's your week been?
Wonderful, man. Doing beautiful here. Loving the weather here in Miami right now. This is why we live here at this time of year. We got to enjoy it while we can. The summer's coming. It's brutal. It's death. It's terrible. But right now, this is beautiful, man. Beautiful. Loving it. How about you, man? How you doing over there?
Good, man. And we actually got a bit of a break today. It was about 55 degrees. Actually, maybe closer to 60, 65, I'm being honest. It's what we call winter warm. And it was warm just enough for it to start snowing, I think, tomorrow again. So it'll go. We go through these. It's one of those things, man. It's like December. December, January, February is sort of like our winter, and that's it. Like it doesn't get too heavy either. For anybody who's freaking out about you thinking that it's like Alaska out here in Denver, Colorado, it is not.
Eskimos, man. Eskimos.
Yeah, indeed. But yeah, as I said today, we're talking about some classic rock, and really what the definition is, depending on who you are, you'll probably hear a lot of different definitions. Speaking of classic rock, we might as well just bring in our guest right now. You might have seen him a couple other times on this podcast, if not the Square Grouper podcast. Welcome, the man, the myth, the legend, Riles. What's up, Bill?
What's happening, Bill?
What's going on?
How you doing, brother?
Good, man. Fuck your weather, Ken.
Sorry, dude. I didn't force you to go to Colorado. You left on your own remission, so it's not on me, man. Not on me.
I did. And my wife in the kitchen's laughing too because she forced me.
Oh well, I'll tell you what.
Everybody in the immediate family had their fair share of forcing Bill to come out here. I know me and my wife definitely were championing that shit. So,
best thing I ever did, other than marry my wife.
Oh, you are a smart man with that comment.
So anyway, Bill, as we were talking about, we're talking about classic rock, and I think what we're going to go ahead and preface that by saying is what we call classic rock, because as the later generations go, that might morph. As a matter of fact, ear to the ground, I think I've been told that there's some other bands that I don't consider to be classic rock that are now being considered classic rock. We won't go into that just yet. But what we're going to definitely do is start at the beginnings of it, because there's obviously there's roots to all of this, and we don't want to necessarily go back to the beginnings of rock and roll because we really already touched on that. We're talking about what we call classic rock, and there's going to be different definitions to that, but we're going to try and narrow that down. I know that for our generation, the Generation X, we're probably going to consider between 60 and 79, 81 to be the classic rock zone for us, but it could kind of slide back. It could slide forward. It depends on the music. But Ken, you've got some history right now, man. So lay some of that on us, man.
Well, I mean, like you touched on, when it comes to classic rock, it's interesting because it's a label that's basically put on rock bands. I mean, at the end of the day, there's no rock band that starts out saying, hey, man, we're going to be the greatest classic rock band ever. That just doesn't happen. Obviously, they're rock bands. And as their music gets older, obviously, we get to the point where we have to decide, okay, these are now classic rock songs. And I believe that, or classic rock bands, but I believe it more comes to the songs themselves. The songs become anthems and the songs become timeless. And then at that point, it really doesn't matter so much the band that produced those songs. It's the song itself. And if it had staying power, both when it came out originally, if it hit the mainstream or not. And when you talk about classic rock, you're talking about a lot of music that came mostly from blues. And this is American rock. This is British rock. You can take things as far back as you want, like Bob discussed. But, for our talking here, classic rock is going to be pretty much from the kind of Vietnam era up into, the late 70s, early 80s. And the boom of that generally being the late 60s into the early mid 70s for, again, what we would call classic rock for our Gen X group. But yeah, there's bands like Aerosmith who's made music in the 70s and made music in 2000s. And their music in the 70s is iconic, Dream On, Sweet Emotion. These are anthems. They're timeless. They're going to be played forever, but not necessarily as music that they made in the 2000s. Them as a band will be described as a classic rock band, but not necessarily is their entire catalog going to be remembered as much as those certain anthems will. So be it Aerosmith or be it a one-hit wonder, that's generally where I feel that classic rock gets its label, is those songs and also the time in which they were played. So when we talk about Vietnam era music, for me, it's going to be Creedence Clearwater Revival, Crosby, Stills and Nash, Byrds. These are classic rock bands that were talking about what was happening at that time. In Vietnam, we had a lot of Americans, younger Americans, that were being forced to go to war by generally a group of older Americans that were in charge of what they were going to do. That backlash created a lot of music, and of course, that music became mainstream. So it wasn't just that there were young people listening and promoting this music and buying this music and going to listen to these bands live and going to these shows. You had mainstream folks listening to it because of what was being said, and it was pertinent at the time. That made classic rock, or rock at that time, become a more mainstream music, and these songs to become more iconic for why we hear them today and remember those. For people our age, not necessarily old enough to have gone to serve in Vietnam, we appreciate the music. But for people older than us that did serve, that music means even more to them.
Well, let's get a little clip of what happened back then. Man,
love CCR,
they just
man.
jam ass. They're just so good, man.
And a song about Vietnam.
Yep. Probably the that song, War, obviously is a big song. Ohio, obviously a big song. These are songs people remember that immediately will relate to Vietnam.
Right. Obviously, pop culture, cinema. There's a lot that played into the training of us, adding or connecting those two dots, if I'm being honest. But again, we know that I definitely think of Nam, early 70s when I think of CCR. That's just, I think it's one of those automatic things. Bill, growing up with Riles over here, there's a lot of bands that were flying through on vinyl in our house. There's one band in particular that I know Bill fucking latched onto very, very early. And I remember him having massive, massive collections of audio tapes of this band in concert. And that band was Zeppelin. Bill, go ahead and go off a little bit on the love you had for that band, because I know for a fact that was
Obsession.
Yeah, no doubt.
Obsession. I used to hunt down live shows on cassette, live 8mm, 16mm silent footage on VHS. I would buy on the black market just to see. Yeah, it was a pretty obsessive time for me. I just loved Zeppelin's live shows. They would go out and play 3.5 hours, like Rush, kind of like Rush, at a much more heavier level. Of course, not as technical as Rush, but they gave you all the $9.50 your concert ticket cost.
How old were you, Bill, when you got into Led Zeppelin? Do you remember what age you started getting into a band like that?
8.
Wow. And what year was that, if you don't mind aging yourself?
77.
That's awesome, man. So that's like the height of this music. I'm just being able to listen at that time is incredible. I came so far after the fact, but go, please. I can't talk over Kashmir.
Jimmy Page's Heroin Days.
Bonzo baby. Oh, just such a heaviness, man. Yeah, that's the truth, man. And I know Zeppelin is definitely I believe there's probably, I don't know if we could really compile if we could try and compile a big four of classic rock. That's because that's when we start getting into sort of that, like, well, what do you call classic rock? I think we just explained, really, we're going to go from like 63, 64, 65 to about 80 and stop it for us. The bands that I think of, this is definitely a memory I think of when I think of classic rock. I think of my stepfather Tom saying, "Oh, you like these? You like Metallica? Yeah. You like all these other bands? That's definitely one of them for sure. You like these bands? Well, you got to check out this dude."
There's the man.
Dude, again, I've got to go ahead. I've got to remark right now that footage is incredible. Take mark of where that is. You guys, you really need to go back and take a look at that and save that, because for that to be from when it was, man, and not to mention, we just saw two dudes run up there with massive fucking cameras up there. Like, holy shit, man. I think that was obviously professionally done. It was mic'd up. Right. It was awesome. But man, I don't know, man. Jimmy, there's just so many bands that I think can encapsulate that whole experience. For me, I go back to sort of like my background, looking at listening to the first Boston album, Kansas and all these other bands. And, classic rock is like, again, there's a reason why they call it classic rock. It's just one of those things that they kind of get embedded in American culture, regardless of whether they're an American classic rock bands, because there's obviously non-American classic rock bands. We just named a couple. Right. Mm-hmm. And it really has less to do with that and more exactly with what you said, to do with sort of that faster bluesy, heavy sound. And it carried on for a long time, man. Matter of fact, wow, that was a crazy segue. We can get to another clip real fast, and we'll get into that later shot too from Maya Marina, which is mind-boggling how good that was. But don't you cry no more. Look at those shorts, man.
Love them, and the socks.
Oh, take it easy. Take it easy, dude. I don't quite remember that being. Is that the guy from Manowar? That he eventually went on to sing in Manowar. Am I wrong? Is that the case? I don't know. That's some stuff right there, man. Holy shit! What the hell is up with that? He's greasy, dude.
5 rows there are going to really enjoy that show.
That's how we do it in Kansas, y'all. Greasy. But yeah, man. Again, I heard. We spoke about this. I heard sort of like, if you start doing these comparisons, eventually we're going to start talking about, like you said, Green Day, Nirvana, as these bands sort of being classic rock, because whether anybody wants to admit it or not, it may be some of the last music that we have that is hard rock and considered edgy rock, because whether you consider grunge to be grunge or not, it's all based on rock. Some of it's very metallic, obviously. But I guess I can see that, as much as I don't consider, because even when Green Day came out, I wouldn't consider that punk rock either. But apparently, that's what it's called. I don't compare that to the 80s punk that myself and Riles listened to. There's no fucking way. It's different. It's a little too tame.
It's cleaner. They actually knew how to play their instruments.
Right. I think it had a lot to, obviously, sound production too. It didn't sound like some drunk dude's fucking house, where they were just shooting, recording as fast as they could. But Riles, have you seen any classic rock concerts?
I mean, classic rock artists?
I kind of loaded that question up for you. That's what I'm saying. I know obviously we weren't going to concerts in '79 and shit like that. I'm just saying, were you able to see any of them sort of in that window, like in the late '80s, maybe? Or
oh shit, yeah. Steve Miller, Kansas, Fleetwood Mac. Shit, who else? Cheap Trick, which they were in the '70s.
Yep.
So they're classic rock now.
They were part of that for sure.
Yeah. Boston.
Yeah.
We saw Boston together.
Yep.
Damn. That's all I can probably remember right now.
Well, that's good that you ended on that one, because this is what's crazy. I mean, I'm talking about, it's obvious that we know that there isn't a whole hell of a lot, at least for us, a lot of new music where we say to ourselves, wow, this is great. I'm going to latch myself onto this new band like I did Boston, Journey, or any of these other classic rock bands. So it's understandable that throughout the 90s and even the 2000s, obviously, as we know, because we've seen Boston recently and a few other classic rock bands recently, that they're still doing it really well. And this footage I found blew me away. Not only from where it was shot, but just from the quality of it. So let's take a look at this.
That voice, man.
Yeah, man. And considering that's 1995, Miami Arena, it's insane how good he sounded, man. And if you play that, go ahead and search for it. That note that you hear at the end of that song in the recording studio was obviously extended with electronics, but he does a really, really good extension of that note, holding it for quite a while in that footage. I didn't want to put it in there because I didn't want to risk copyright or anything like that. But yeah, his voice is fucking insane. I do regret not being able to ever see Delp in concert. But I think Tommy DiCarlo does a really, really good job filling in without sort of trying to sound exactly like him, although he's in the same Delp range. It's still pretty cool, I think, to be able to see these bands. And obviously, we don't want to get too deep into Kiss, because even though I'm loving the shirt, I'm wearing the shirt that we got at the actually, this might have been the farewell tour. Yeah. In San Antonio. I still have the shirt from the show you and I went to. I consider them classic rock, but it's sort of a weird thing for me with Kiss. I don't lump them in there with classic rock. Just, I guess maybe because I'm too much of a fanatic. I suppose if you talk to somebody else who has like an 8-track compilation, and they definitely have Kiss on there with other bands from classic rock era, but I consider it to be a little bit different. But
yeah,
Kiss
but it's
still,
the same thing. It's like
it's
one of those bands that have been around so long that they have fallen now, of course, into the time frame that they're going to be considered classic rock. And then it really comes back to, like I was saying earlier, that it's not about the band, it's about the songs. So with Kiss in particular, you're going to hear it over and over and over again. It's an iconic song, and it's going to be there forever. It's like Led Zeppelin's Stairway. It's Rock and Roll All Night. I mean, it's an iconic song. It's going to forever be lumped in with classic rock. And people that are going to describe Kiss that are not necessarily super fans of the band per se, but appreciate all types of classic rock from that time. So this is kind of what I was saying earlier about it not necessarily being about a band, but it about being the songs that they make at the time that they make them. Because there are guys that made music in the 60s and 70s and 80s that if I played the song, you would know it, but you would have no idea who the artist was, because it was truly a one-hit wonder. But at the time they came out, they played that song. It got airtime. It wound up being a popular song and a part of what is going to be considered classic rock when you break down the eras like that. And to get back what you were saying earlier with the, Green Days and the Nirvanas of the world, that's pretty much the last rock and roll kind of genre of music that we've seen to this point, of course, that would be now considered classic rock. And those songs are going to get airplay too. but it's going to be, Metallica, songs off the Black Album and after. It's not going to be Metallica Kill 'Em All. Like, they're not going to play that on classic rock stations. So again, it's not the band, it's the songs. And those songs are what are going to be kind of picked at, and the bands will all be there because they'll fit the time frame, but it's the songs that make it classic rock,
Definitely. And Kiss is as basic rock and roll as you can get. They weren't influenced by many things other than the Beatles. The Beatles are very straightforward blues chords, very simplistic. They obviously, spruced it up with a lot of,
acid.
fire and blood. And
oh.
I don't think Kiss did a lot of acid.
Sorry.
Yes.
Yeah.
The Beatles.
When it comes to
the Beatles changed.
Yeah. When it comes to Kiss, I think they're more of a classic rock band at the time with a little punk and a lot of glam. I think they were probably one of the first bands were influenced by the late 60s glam, early 70s, and actually played rock and roll. So they kind of found that formula. And
they were battling the New York Dolls back in the day for
right.
like clubs in Amityville and shit.
Yeah, but they love the glam side of it. So
and that goes to bands that mix that. I like that too. That's a good point.
So they also influenced these hair metal bands going into the 80s. Kiss. Right. So I love Kiss like anybody else. I don't play them as much as I used to. I rather listen to their live stuff. But they were just as influential as any rock band of our generation when it comes to introducing just that music to kids and getting them to play rock was Kiss.
Yeah.
Right.
The music might not have been fantastic, but their image was, and that's what brought people to buy their albums and listen to it.
Right. And that's a good point to a band like Kiss that was able to kind of also play to the times that they were in. And some of their albums, album to album, as you guys know, can sound a lot different. And they were able to kind of usher in a new sound that I think a lot of bands played off of, similar to what happened also in, taking it back up maybe a decade or so with bands like Traffic and Blue Oyster Cult that kind of blended in some jazz into their rock as well. That kind of played off of that. So Steve Winwood obviously spun off of that to make really his own style of music that I think a lot of jam bands kind of jumped into. So you see all different types of just kind of lineages coming off of that main music that still all stems from blues. But at the end of the day, classic rock has really been a basis for a lot of that. And it kind of just splintered off to all these different things, whether it's punk or rock or metal, all the way through to alternative, Seattle, grunge, whatever you want to call it, up into the mid-late 90s, which is really like we're talking about the kind of the end of rock and roll. And while we're listening to that when we were growing up and in our 20s and 30s and as to where we were in the 90s, we were listening to what will be classic rock, and essentially is considered now to people that are much younger than we are.
Yeah.
Yeah, boy, we're dating ourselves, huh? But it's the truth, man. I mean, it's the damn truth. I tell you what, I don't feel bad at all, man. I think if you've got that little 10-year capsule between, let's just say 68 to 78 was pretty friggin' productive in terms of bands, sound, changing music, kind of getting away from like Bill was talking about the glam of it, New York Dolls kind of shit, and making sure that they strip it all down and just play the music. So there was a couple different. Not more than a couple different, but multiple movements happening at the same time that can all be considered classic rock. You'll have your Southern rock, your Molly Hatchet and things like that sitting right next to like an Aerosmith, but that's still sort of a Southern rock thing. But, Kiss had the accessibility where really anybody could listen to it because they were sort of the first media band where people were getting scared and they were like listening to it because they were afraid of it. We can compare early Kiss like Parasite and real heavy grooves to some of the stuff where they just sort of softened up in order to kind of get more accessible. And then eventually Dynasty rolls around, they're playing disco, and I'm like, fuck yourself. I can't do it anymore.
Child. They hired Desmond Child.
This is why I think a lot of those bands, I think a lot of these bands were really so pressed to make anything at that time because you couldn't allow disco to continue.
Well,
disco had to die.
Aerosmith did it in the 80s. They hired songwriters. And they got huge. Their comeback, part two of their comeback was probably money-wise and album-wise bigger than their 70s stuff.
Wow.
Oh, that 90s shit they put out sold like
Unbelievable.
fucking crazy, dude.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Like
Yep.
I don't know. I can't really explain it either. I know that there was sort of like it had a lot to do with some movies that were happening, and then their videos they were putting out, and
Videos,
there was
yeah.
a lot
The
of
videos were big. Yeah, the videos were definitely
lot of
big. That
attachment.
pushed a lot of it. And but that's what I'm saying. I mean, Love in an Elevator is never going to be Sweet Emotion. You know what I mean? It's just like that's the song for Aerosmith, and that's how they'll always be remembered. Will be songs like Dream On and Sweet Emotion, not you know anything off of Pump or any of these other albums that they made for money.
Say you were born in 1979, and you listened. That was the first Aerosmith you heard. Was Love in an Elevator and Dude Looks Like a Lady, and you fell in love with those songs, and you're like, maybe listen to this back catalog, and you're like, maybe not.
That sounds so old.
They might not like. We will remember Sweet Emotion and Dream On and all those, Toys in the Attic, all the great Draw the Line, all that fucking really hard shit. And
Train kept rolling.
I'd rather hear Dude Looks Like a Lady.
Yeah.
The generation after us.
Right.
It's sad, but
I find it. I think it's interesting how I automatically would say to myself, I don't love the '90s Aerosmith, but there's a couple songs that I actually do like. I won't tell anybody what the fuck they are, so don't ask. There's a couple that I'm like.
I think Ragdoll was a fun song.
Yeah,
but that's what I mean. Like that, they were.
I mean, I thought that was pretty good. And
had a pretty good video, man. That chick was pretty hot.
Yeah,
I'm just saying.
The music, it was still the same kind of music. What my point was that if you put just the music and put your hatred and disdain for that kind of Aerosmith aside and compare it to sort of like Train Kept a Rolling and stuff like that, it's all in the same vein. It's all very rock and roll like it was. It's just as we got older and matured, we started thinking about Aerosmith as being this band back there. And for them all of a sudden to pop up at 92 and start like fucking playing music, we're like, nah, dude, you don't get that shot. You know, like there's this new music happening.
Okay.
And I think it's sort of a fight, like you're fighting history, like at least that's what I was doing with Aerosmith in the 90s for sure.
And to that point, a band like Rush. I mean, Rush has also played music back in the 70s and all the way through into the 2000s, but their catalogs are amazing. Their music is amazing. Album after album. And we might look back and say 2001, everything that's early from them is the classic Rush, and stuff that was later, Presto, whatnot, is newer Rush, but it's still Rush. And at the end of the day, they will be considered a classic rock band. They already are, regardless of when that music came out. It could have come out in the 90s, but it's still classic rock. It's Rush. It belongs there. Their music is that good. What's
great about Rush is that they were musicians. They were three at the peak of Geddy was the greatest bass player. You got the greatest drummer of all time, as far as I'm concerned.
Absolutely, hands down.
Alex was so underrated. So you had these musicians. I really enjoyed their whole catalog. You'll find Rush fans who were before Moving Pictures, and then there's Rush fans after Moving Pictures when synthesizers started coming in. Yeah. I love it all. I don't care. I listen to Grace Under Pressure just as much as I listen to
I agree.
2112. Or Permanent Wave.
And obviously being a Rush fan is someone that has to embrace the evolution of that band and be totally okay with, because there's definitely some songs where as a Rush fan, you're probably like, I don't love it, but you're not going to be like, I hate it, because you just have too much respect for the band.
Now, in the early 80s, I was a huge Metallica fan. I loved Metallica, loved Megadeth. And once after, and we've talked about this ad nauseum, after And Justice for All, I could care less about any of it. So you could be that fan that is like, you know what? I love their old shit. Their new shit I don't care about. So that's how I feel about Metallica.
Yeah.
Yeah. No, I definitely. And I saw somebody somebody commented about David Bowie. Absolutely. We can't have a classic rock show and not mention Bowie. So Bowie. Thanks, Mark.
And I tell you what, Bowie influenced Kiss. There's the connection right there.
For sure.
I mean, it's just
absolutely. That is a good connection. Absolutely.
They all are intertwined.
Yeah, because obviously what they wanted to do was build four characters that were, unlike themselves, that there was some sort of, very Ziggy, like you say, and being able to, even Alice Cooper, even though most people didn't know Alice Cooper wasn't Alice Cooper out of the makeup. They just assumed he fucking lived with that snake, I guess. But that was a simpler time back then where you can build yourself and build your reputation just off of a few shows because people got photographs as opposed to.
And he was a classic horror nut, Universal Monsters nut, and so he brought that on the stage. He was one of the first theater musicians that would bring an actual play on stage. He wrote some good songs too. That didn't help. That helped a little bit because if he didn't write anything good, you wouldn't remember him. So let's not take that away from him. But he brought like a show. He was the first one to actually do a show,
right,
with all the props and explosions and heads chopping off and guillotines and all that stuff. He scared the shit out of you. But the music was fantastic, and kids loved it. I would have loved Alice Cooper in 1972.
For sure.
Yeah, rock theater, man. Rock theater definitely was a thing, and a lot of bands that started to follow and doing that same kind of stuff on stage. It's very true.
I didn't get to see Alice Cooper until I want to say like maybe 6 or 7 years ago. I went with Jay and Russ. They came out here and we saw Cooper open up for Crew. And I was like, I had to go. I was like, fuck, I don't want to go see Motley Crue anymore. But I was like, I've never seen Cooper, dude. So I just took it. I bit it. And I was still blown away. And obviously, I've seen enough footage from back in the days to know that he's obviously doing the same stuff he did back then. And it looked just as amazing. And I think it was really cool that I at least got to experience that. Obviously, I didn't get to experience it in back in his heyday. But Cooper, to me, I think falls into that 60s movement. He's just sort of like this dark figure among like the flower powered light that was happening back then. And that's what I kind of lump him. And I know he's classic rock, but I don't necessarily consider him classic rock because of the theatrical form of him. But he to me was sort of like a counterculture. He was very early punk rock. Like, I know you like this music, but I'm going to kill someone on stage. Is that cool? Like, you don't think it's cool? Fuck you.
I saw him in the late 80s. When he came out with that album where, like, what's that Poison song? Was it?
Poison, yes.
Oh, yeah.
So he became big again. He opened up for somebody, I forgot, but I did see him, and I thought, yay, man, it was pretty good. I enjoyed it.
I think he mentioned Aerosmith's Resurrection as a reason why he did that. But go ahead, Ken.
No, finish your thought. Go ahead.
Well, I think that was during that time in the 90s where classic rock bands, I think we're seeing Aerosmith coming back, and you start seeing 92, 93, some bands like obviously Alice Cooper that are putting out music that's a little dated, but they're still trying to sell it. Obviously by then 93, there was nothing scary about Alice Cooper in 1990, 91, 92.
And another thing to remember, Bobby, as these bands got older, I'm taking Rush, put Rush aside. They wrote all their own stuff. All these classic rock bands that became big in the late 80s, early 90s again, doesn't know how to write their own music anymore. They had to pay people to write their songs.
Right.
So you look at those liner notes, it's not that group writing those songs.
Right.
Aerosmith didn't write any of their hits, almost any of their hits in the 80s and 90s.
That's crazy. Can you imagine just trying to get 4% of the publishing rights or the writing rights to all that, man. Oh my God.
Yeah.
But the problem is it became more commercial than it became about the musician. And I feel like the music of the 60s and the 70s and stuff where you were actually able to put what was happening in the world to song through lyrics. And I feel that message that would come across in the music also came across in the performances with these guys. And that's, to me, the feeling you get with that music. That's so much deeper and more meaningful than the stuff they tried to push across later in the 90s when it was just about selling albums, when we did still sell albums back then. That was also the last generation of doing that. But that's all they were looking for. The music wasn't meaningful to them anymore, to the band individually. And that could be felt, I feel, by fans, true fans of the band at that time. Alice Cooper is a perfect example that, for me, I hated all that stuff. Poison, that stuff he made for the Friday the 13th movie that came back, that he's back. Terrible music. I hear that stuff on there at Gone. I have satellite, so I listen to a lot of my old stuff, but I cannot stand. I like old Alice Cooper, but man, that guy should have not released any of that crap afterwards, in my mind.
Ken, you make an interesting point about the mid to late 60s with these classic rock bands actually writing songs about what was happening in the world, about change and stuff. I think that's never going to happen again because there's more outlets for young people now to get their feelings out. Back in the late 60s and early 70s, that's all they could do. There was no Twitter. There was no social media. Reporters didn't want to talk to you, especially if you had long hair. Nobody gave a shit about anything you had to say unless you're picketing in the streets. So these musicians are like, you know what? I'm going to get my word across by making some music and get people to listen to it and understand. They don't do that anymore, and it's probably never going to happen again.
That's actually a really good point. And you also look at the type of music that we're looking at today, more electronic, less about instruments anymore. So I feel like the passion with a lot of musicians comes also from your instrument. A guitar player is passionate about his guitar. A drummer's passionate about his drums. You don't have that when you just have somebody sitting behind a keyboard and a computer and making music. There's no feeling to that. You can't sit at home, put your headphones on and say, yeah, you know what? This music speaks to me. This music is what it tells my story and how I feel, like we did listening to metal back in the day, or some people that got into punk, they got into it for the messaging, man. And we don't have that anymore. And you're right. That's a great point, Bill. And losing that feel is gonna, to me, really make the music that's actually produced be a lot less enjoyable. And maybe I'm just the old guy saying, get off my lawn, and I don't enjoy that kind of music anymore. And I like what I like, but I truly don't hear that level of intensity in the music that shows it's really coming from the artist.
Yeah.
I'm going to counterpoint you on that one. Just a little section of what you said about how I'm going to put it in a nutshell, but sort of like how the expressiveness or sort of the storytelling or any of that, the heart and soul of the music doesn't seem to exist really anymore in music, or at least with any new bands, where I don't know if that's necessarily the truth. And I think maybe just because when you have obviously a new generation of people who are grown up on a mixture of different music. Now you have to understand that people who are, 20 years old now are obviously pretty young. They had a very weird group of music that they grew up listening to. We're talking about the 90s and the 2000s. So I believe maybe this newer generation is just in tune sonically to a different kind of wavelength of music. And it's all attached to culture, I believe. It's all attached to now commercialism, jingles, and all kinds of stuff, which would always kind of had an impact when we were growing up. But I just think it's so much more now. And I think maybe music does have feeling for a lot of people who make it now. I just don't think it's music that we feel anymore, because we grew up listening to what the music that we're just talking about right now. You'll be hard pressed to try and get somebody in their 20s right now to listen to any of the fucking music we just listed right now without listening to it and thinking of it as some sort of like a parlor joke or some weird music you listen to, smoking weed in a Firebird when you were 9 or something. Like it's definitely some weirdness, I'm guessing. But I still think there's feeling in music now to people, or else maybe they wouldn't be making it. I don't know. Yeah.
Well, I think the feeling is different now than it was, say, 5 years ago, because it's more of they're more, instead of a message of words and lyrics, it's more of a message of beats. Like the kids nowadays, it's all about the beats. They don't even give a shit about, there's no message in the song, because half the time you don't even know what the fuck he's saying. It's going through some sort of an electric synthesizer through the Apple computer. And so there's no reason to have a message when, if you make a good beat, that's what's making people feel alive. Back then it was a combination of it, but it was more so, I'm going to pull this lyric sheet out. I'm going to hear what this guy has to say. And you go, wow, he's opening up my mind. I understand what he's feeling. Now it's more of a beat and a more of a physical feeling and not a mental feeling.
And maybe that's something that it just goes over my head. I mean, I get beats and understandings of good music like that. I definitely do. But at the same time, I feel, I guess I'm more attached to lyrics. But, and Bob, to your point earlier, I love Vietnam era music. I didn't grow up at that time. So those words don't necessarily speak directly to me to where I could say, oh, yeah, I remember those hardships. But I definitely feel the emotion in the music. And that's more what I'm talking about than necessarily that we grew up and it was talking about our time in particular. It's more about being able to feel that in the music. And you're right, I'm probably incorrect in saying that no new music has that, because it probably does. And I'm thinking, I guess, more what's top 40, what's the biggest music, and I don't know. I'm probably wrong about that too. It's just not my music. There's probably plenty of lyrics. I'm sure Taylor Swift does a great job talking about her ex-boyfriends in her songs, and I know she writes her own music, and give her a lot of props for doing that. But it's not my music. I'm not interested, so I don't really feel it just the same. And again, that could just be me, but the emotion says a lot. And you know what? I'm going to name one real quick right now, actually, because I actually have a band that I feel, and it's a newer band, so it doesn't fit our classic rock too much, but maybe not that new, but Alabama Shakes. That's the band when you listen to that woman sing, man, that woman's got emotion to her. And that's, so there are a few, I guess, out there I got to give a little bit of sound to. But Alabama Shakes, my wife of all people turned me on to this band. But there's emotion there. Again, I felt it like I hadn't felt that in a while listening to bands when I listened to that band.
But Ken, Alabama Shakes have been around for over 20 years.
Has it been 20 now? I was going to say, I don't know how new they are, but
so they were influenced
still
by
new.
the band before them. So they're still in that generation of kind of rock and hard countries,
Damn, I didn't know
and
they've been around that long.
songwriters.
All right, then I still don't like new shit then. All right, there you go. That's the best I could find, and it didn't even fit the category, man. Sorry. Oh, there you go. You found it.
Your life, my life, don't cross the line.
That's stanky. That's
I'm
stanky right
man.
there.
You got that.
You can tell who she's influenced by right there.
Of course, 100%. And the music I love, and that's why I feel it with her.
Yeah.
When she sings, I feel it. I feel what she's been influenced from, and I like it. So I guess that goes back to taste.
Maybe a connection.
That's how I feel about Amy Winehouse. I mean, you listen to her sing, you're like, holy shit, this
soul.
Yeah, I mean, and it reminded me of the, Ella Fitzgerald and Sinatra.
I fucking love her, dude. I love her to death.
I totally agree. So it does exist, but we got to reach a little harder to find it.
Right. It's not everywhere.
That's the truth. Yeah, and I know that there's a new wave of sort of singer-songwriter that we've been seeing with the evolution of shows like The Voice and American Idol, where people are I think those shows, as shitty as they can be, are sort of still keeping the vein of songwriting, musicianship in some way alive, where we don't really have a lot of hope.
Well, I'll name somebody, Bobby. And I'm not a fan, but I've heard some of his songs, and he writes his own songs, and he's got a message, and whatever message it is, it gets across. Is that guy Ed Sheeran? Now, I don't like his
multimillionaire for sure.
Yeah, but if you sit down and listen to a song, he's giving you a message. He's telling you something that he's feeling what's coming through in his song. Like I said, I don't like it, but he writes his own music, plays guitar, he does it all. So you got to give that guy props.
Absolutely.
Yeah, you're right.
Anybody who writes their own music and plays an instrument, I'm already on board with you, man. I give you props right there. What about Heart? Heart's
awesome.
Heart is like Led Zeppelin 2.0. If anybody,
yep,
and some amazing versions of Led Zeppelin I've heard through Heart, but yes, they're definitely part of that.
Iconic.
I don't think we skipped over that. It's just that if we want to go ahead and start talking about every damn band that has to do with classic rock, we're going to try and not go over an hour tonight, and we'll be doing 3 hours if we're going to have to talk about all of them.
But Simon's right. Heart should be there. Bowie should be there. Mark, thank you earlier for mentioning. So anyone else that thinks of something we're forgetting about, throw it on out there. Go ahead.
And this is a good point here, too.
We're talking about Sheeran and stuff, so let's get off of that.
Mark Siegel saying that his older son didn't like rock until he played Guitar Hero. And I want to just, I'm not going to get on a tangent here about this. Let me just say, before my wife purchased these electronic drums that I have, these Elises that I've had for years now, and they're great, and they really let me play drums the way I want to. I didn't have any way of playing that until I started picking up Guitar Hero and Rock Band, more specifically Rock Band, as a drummer. Out of all the instruments and those Rock Band things that are all very quirky and stupid, the drums are really the only ones that are sort of correct and give you rudimentary correctness when you're playing that. So you're playing hi-hat depending on what hand you play with, and it's all very accurate. I really, really attribute my ability to keep playing drums to Rock Band, but also I attribute Rock Band with the ability to show a new generation old guitar rock, which basically Guitar Hero could have just been called classic rock, or You know what I mean? Like it, because that's all that shit is in there. You know, mixed in some Tenacious D and stuff, which is all very rock and roll too, and definitely. I think they had a really, really big impact. I'm glad you brought that up because they introduced a new energy.
Huge impact because the music school, after school programs are being closed. Nobody cared about music and playing an instrument. And then these kids, these video game generation kids, picked up one of these and like, oh, if I could do this on this fake guitar, I'm going to try a real guitar. And they did. So it kind of saved musicianship for a good 15 years.
Right.
Yeah, I think maybe Dr. Brian mentioned something about that in something he wrote a long time ago. And I remember talking to him. I remember having the sort of the same idea at the same time and agreeing with him. He's I think he mentioned it too about how it was just sort of instrumental in keeping kids in this pivotal time where music was just becoming LimeWire. You know, you just download that shit all you want. They were still able to get licensing rights for some of these songs and give music to the artists for including themselves on these video games. And then having someone come in and that's never heard of it all of a sudden be able to play it. Like someone just mentioned, Brian mentioned, thank you, Greta Van Fleet. That's another good example of sort of an, obviously we know exactly who we can tie them to, but there's also other bands like Wolf Mother and some other bands that sort of sound like a new version of like Black Sabbath and stuff like that. And so I think there's going to always be, there was just such a good impact of classic rock during that time where I think no matter what throughout the generations, there'll be a copycat of that time. I don't think anyone's lining up to like recreate the sound of Aha other than The Weeknd, like I just showed you. Because I think that's what the joke of that video was like. This is basically a ripoff of Aha, dude, and everyone's buying it because the sound of the 80s is back. And it's that evolution.
I love that song Blinding Lights by The Weeknd. But guess what I bought off of iTunes? I bought the music and not the lyrical one. Because it reminded me of an 80s soundtrack like Tangerine Dream, all those old 80s like Georgia Moroder.
Dude, when I first heard it, I automatically was like GTA Vice City.
Yeah, so good. So I bought it without the lyrics. They had one that you can buy without him actually singing on it. It was just the music. I bought it.
And it's super fucking simple, dude. And like I said, it's just sort of a morph of Take On Me from Aha, but it's built in that same way where like, you know, and I think it's kind of what's amazing. He's definitely a guy that we can talk about, not classic rock, not attached to any of it, but just one of those guys who is making music that is different than what the generation is making right now. And it's attached to the shit we grew up on in the 80s. And so he's got us listening to them too, you know, which is genius if you think about it. I mean, we might be the last generation who would be totally okay paying for music.
Right.
That's true. And that's what I think is going to happen eventually anyway is, like everything, man, it's going to get to the point where the kids are going to start wanting to research more of the classic stuff. And then those beats and those sounds become popular again. And I think you are going to see more of that. And it's going to be the next transition of music. And what's the next blend of music to where you could maybe bring some of these electronic artists in to this to music as well, to real instruments and blend this music once more to try to bring people in like myself that back in the day, you know, having rock added to rap got me into rap. So now if you've got people that are into electronic, maybe we blend that into rock somehow and they all, you know, and maybe kind of like what The Weeknd is doing, I guess, in taking some of those types of familiar tracks to those of us that, you know, grew up with those sounds. So, you know, who knows where it's going to go next, but I do believe at some point there could be and should be hopefully a resurgence of this type of music because it is so good and it's still music that I think is timeless and that will keep even with today. As long as people get a chance to hear it. You know, you see those videos with guys listening to music that they never hear before for the first time and wigging out at it. You know, there's a lot of great music that they would do that too. And I think more people hear that and the more the younger crowd hears some of that stuff, I think, you know, I don't know, maybe it's just hopeful for me, but I'm hoping that music does make a comeback in some way or another.
Yeah, well, movies and TV commercials.
Right.
Are helping that too.
Yep, you're right. You're right.
We are a highly marketable generation.
Mm-hmm. Yes, we are. There's no doubt. There's no doubt.
As long as we're still alive, really, because there's no one to market this shit to after we're dead.
Right. That's a good point. Yeah, that's the point of the night right there.
A living commodity, baby.
Don't market anything to the dead.
Yeah.
Good job.
So if the Casually Serious podcast is not complete ever unless we come up with some sort of list a la High Fidelity or any other top 3, top 5 that we usually talk about. So as a guest of the show, Riles, if you had to compile 3 bands that encompass classic rock, what are they? What is your classic rock concert must have 3 bands?
Okay, now you're talking my favorite classic rock artist, not what I consider a classic rock band.
Right. Well, we're going to do it because it's going to be all about who we think so. Yes, it's going to be obviously a personal thing. So tell us personally.
Okay, obviously Led Zeppelin number 1.
Right. So they're headlining.
Oh, fuck yeah, they're headlining.
Okay.
God damn. I don't know if you want to consider them rock, but they are kind of rock. I want to see Pink Floyd in the original group playing Animals 1977 in its entirety. I mean, they're more psychedelic rock. You see, you're putting classic rock. There's so many different genres of classic rock. There's glam classic rock. There's prog classic rock, Rush. So I'm just telling you who I would want to have seen.
Answer the question, Claire.
Yeah. Fuck.
See, this is the challenge in this. It sounded all very casually Cadbury A, like I got this, dude. 3 fucking bands. Let's roll with it. You can't say one without shitting on another.
I would probably put Sabbath, the original lineup of Sabbath, in the number 3.
Okay. So what you said you had Zeppelin and Sabbath and Floyd. Is that what you're saying?
Yeah.
All right, KenMan. Top 3 must-have bands playing in your classic rock concert, circa 1979.
Oh, we're doing 3.
3.
I'm gonna go.
And I would let Jimi Hendrix do a 10-minute opener.
Hey, what's up, baby? I'm just gonna play some guitar, baby.
You just stole my guy, man. You just stole my guy. I was actually gonna have Hendrix as my headliner. Hendrix is my headliner anyway, so he could have 2 minutes of Bill's show real quick, and then he's gonna jump over and headline mine. I'm gonna have CCR in there for sure, man. I absolutely love Creedence, man. So we'll put them in there. Allman Brothers, I'll round out as my 3rd.
Good choice.
Wow, that's pretty heavy. Allman. I don't think we spoke about them. I think mine are pretty easy. I'm going to go with Led Zeppelin for sure. I'm going with Boston, and I wanted to say Floyd, but again, I think I think they are a little prog rock. Tammy pointed out they are a little proggy. They're definitely different. I think it's a shift. So we're going to go Led Zeppelin, Boston, and God, man, that's tough, man. I don't want to go against. I don't. When I think about it, I think I do think of Jimmy too, but I don't know, man. I think I have to throw CCR in there. So it'll be CCR, and then Boston opening up for Led Zeppelin. That's my
there you go.
That's my ultimate classic rock sound rainbow. Right then and there.
I saw John Fogerty about 15 years ago. He was fucking awesome.
Yeah, that still counts, I think. Right?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
It's the sound. It's the sound. Yep. It's the sound you're looking for.
Yep.
There's no one that I don't think I can jump in there and sing that.
I mean, if you wanted to, I could have easily told you the Doors, fucking Hendrix, and Janis Joplin. Like, I mean,
sure.
So
absolutely.
That is pure classic rock, but I just gave you 3 that I care about more.
Yeah, and I know. I think that. Yeah, and I believe the Doors are sort of. I don't know. The Doors are classic rock for sure. To me, it's they have like sort of a specialty mark in my head where I don't sort of drop them in there with those bands. I guess maybe because of the story around them, the personality with Jim and all that shit. That could be the reason why. And again, another reason why I don't think Pink Floyd is classic rock, but they are. But it's trippy shit. You know what I mean? Just like
it's psychedelic rock.
There's 2 Beatles too, and I like the trippy Beatles. I don't like the Love Me Do shit. So there's evolutions of all these sounds. And before we get out of here, thanks so much for everybody that came and hang out. We actually had quite a few viewers at some point. For those of you that hung out with us the whole entire 53 minutes so far, thank you so much. From Brian Smith from hanging out from the beginning, Tammy, obviously Simon. We got Mark kind of peppered in there as well. Definitely Be Red. What is up, Be Red? You should be getting that in the mail very soon. Again, I think most of the folks, as KenMan points out, most of the folks that watch this show are probably around our age, maybe a little younger, maybe a little older. It doesn't really matter. So I think the content right here, everyone can relate to, because like Riles pointed out, we're commercialized everywhere. This music that we grew up on is attached to usually every GMC truck commercial, probably, right? Don't you think that had at least one classic rock band in every one of those commercials?
And beer commercials.
Beer's another one. I imagine if they could make cigarette commercials, that we'd be attached to that too. There's a band also that I want to mention before we get out of there that is in that classic rock realm that we didn't really touch on, and that has connections to like Jimi Hendrix, and that is Journey. I think really I think because of the popularity point of that band and the music that was popular, I don't think a lot of people, I think some of us might think of it as sort of rock ballad or arena rock or something like that.
Arena rock.
That shit's, there's a lot of classic dude, like, Stone in Love. And there's a lot of,
it's great music there.
Neil Sean's in is the top 5, my favorite guitarist in my top 5, Neil Sean. That's how that guy shreds on every friggin' song.
Yep. I'll take another member of that band. I will say Steve Smith is easily in my top 10 all-time drummers, even though he was recently fired. Right. Steve Smith is fucking great, man. For Neil Peart went to him for some advice. There's some pretty cool stories about that. And Aldridge as well, Tommy Aldridge and all that stuff. But yeah, man, it's classic rock is a great portion. I have a huge Spotify playlist that I have that I've compiled over the years that I add to every once in a while when I hear music. I'm probably going to go start adding CCR to it because I don't have enough of that.
Can't have enough.
Yeah, there's just nothing but good memories, at least in my mind. And just like anything else, I believe it's where you were when you were listening to it. So classic rock reminds me of South Florida, all throughout my life in South Florida, but probably a little bit closer to the time when it was a little bit more rednecky in South Florida. And that was more of a classic rock vibe out there. Not to say that ever died, but when the 80s came, Miami, Florida changed a lot. But it all reminds me of South Florida because of the awesome memories attached to it.
Plus, our brother and sister played it all the time. So.
Yes. Shout out to Mike and Joanne for real. Yeah, I think that's a good point, man. It's sort of, and that music was popular at the time, but they made sure to pass that down to us. I mean, I do remember opening up this album and cracking it open. I think it might have been Mike's version of it, because I don't know if we were buying Boston albums. I think we were probably Van Halen buying a lot of that stuff a little bit later, more so.
I remember pushing that 8-track in Mike's Trans Am into the.
That's some good shit right there, man. Yep. Those things are worth a lot of money right now. But anyway, go ahead.
I was going to say that's how I got started actually with classic rock, was records, just flipping through my dad's. I had a little Fisher Price record player, and I would go and grab my dad's big records to put on that thing. Black Sabbath, they had Rolling Stones, Pink Floyd, Led Zeppelin. So just looking through those records of both my mom and dad's collection was pretty cool. But that's, like you said, it's where you are, what it brings you back to. And that's what it brings me back to, is way back into my childhood and knowing that I kind of got my love of that music from my parents, which is awesome.
For anyone, before we go, and I'm going to list it because you just reminded me of them, is there one band that you could consider classic rock that you absolutely do not like? I will go first, Rolling Stones.
Oh, I fucking love the Stones. Oh, shit. The Stones.
That's what I'm saying, man. Bro. But then I can name 5 songs that I really like from them. But this is what I'm saying. I don't love them as a band, but there's 5 songs I give them credit for the influence and the massive catalog, but I just don't love them overall as a band. I don't own any Rolling Stones shit. I will never seek out any Rolling Stones music ever. I know there's some that if I hear it, I'm like, that's pretty cool, I guess. Is there anyone that you think about, KenMan, that you're like, I don't really vibe with them?
Well, it's funny you say Rolling Stones, because I felt that way up until the Bridges of Babylon tour that I was lucky enough to see at the Orange Bowl. And that show changed my mind at the Rolling. When I saw them live at that show, I was like, never mind. Because first of all, I realized how many songs they have that I know. And I also watched an incredible performance in that show. It sounded great. It looked great. I was a Stones fan after that. Another band I disliked was The Doors up until the movie, for some reason. Hated the Doors. Movie
Val
came
Kilmer,
out,
baby.
saw the movie, and I absolutely loved the Doors after the movie. So those don't quite work because those were ones I didn't like until at such time. I have one though, for sure, no doubt. The Who. I cannot stand The Who. I don't want to hear The Who. Anything you play from The Who, you could chuck that shit. I don't care. Tommy, your fucking opera, whatever the fuck you want. I don't want to hear it. Get it the fuck out.
Okay,
I don't
Tommy,
need it.
get the
Who,
fuck out of here.
Out of here.
Ken, you took my band. I fucking hate The Who. I do like one song from them called "It's Eminence Front." That's
a great song. It's a fucking great song. And there's a few that are good, but then again, it's because it's Townsend forward. That's why. I think Daltrey, I fucking hate Daltrey. Matter of fact, I just remember him saying something like 6 years ago out here in Denver. I won't play Denver because there's nothing but fucking potheads in the crowd, and I don't want to smell that shit all night long. And I was like, fuck you, you suck then, you suck now. You're not getting any fucking money from me. So and
they hated Led Zeppelin. The Who hated Led Zeppelin. They ripped them in the friggin' press, and you're like, right there and there, I hated fucking The Who.
I didn't even know that, and I hate them more now for knowing that. So.
Any more ammunition? And before we go,
what the hell? Yo, the sign is real simple, B. It says rock it.
All right then. Well, we ran a little late. Whatever.
That's
life, man.
We hit the hour.
Riles, thank you so much, man.
You didn't let me say who my pick was.
Oh, I thought Ken stole it. Go ahead now.
You did, but Bruce fucking Springsteen.
Fuck Bruce. Yeah. Very good. Very good.
I'm good with that. I got no argument there.
I'm in the John Cougar camp. Fuck Bruce Springsteen. I don't care what street his band is from. The band never resonated. I'm glad you said that, Bill, because that's the truth, man. But then again, I don't know if it was the music. I just thought I think growing up, I thought Bruce tried too hard. I think Bruce tried too hard in situations where John Cougar was just like, just fucking doing his thing. And I'm like, that shit's cooler. You know what I mean? Like, that's more Americana for me.
You know who else I hate? Jimmy Buffett sucks.
I can't go there. I can't go there. Sorry, man. Sorry, I'm a parrot head. I love me some Jimmy, man. I'm sorry. I got to disagree on that one.
Overplayed growing up. That's all.
It's definitely overplayed. No doubt overplayed. But I love Jimmy, man. He's fun. That's just fun music.
As a native Floridian, you are either going to absolutely love Jimmy Buffett or absolutely hate him. My wife, the director,
I do hate Gloria
loves Jimmy Buffett.
No.
I do too. Yeah, we could just get on a list on who we hate in the 80s too, because anything that has to do with Miami Sound Machine, I'm fucking out of there.
Oh, Gloria Stefan's a fucking god.
Fuck Gloria.
Gloria. All right, guys. Riles, thanks for coming and hanging out, man. I appreciate it. We couldn't really have a classic rock show without having you in here, simply because you had a lot of influence on me musically throughout my life anyway, but especially during that very necessary time when classic rock was getting popular to us. But
I thought you were going to say that was the old one in the group here.
Oh, come on. You actually look younger than probably all three of us.
Okay.
Dad passed on some genes, man. KenMan, you got anything to say before we get out here, man?
No, just thanks again for everybody that chimed in to check us out, and look forward to seeing y'all in here next week, 9:30, same time. We'll have some new music to talk about. I think we're gonna probably, I don't know, who knows? I'm not even gonna try to predict what we're gonna talk about, but it's probably gonna be something musical more than likely.
We might wrap up the mixtape. I don't know, that little foam part in the center of the mixtape. I think it's starting to pop up.
There we
pop
go.
Off, and once that goes away, unless you can cut off a piece of eraser and scotch tape it in there, it really will never sound the same. So we might have to stop it at 4.
Yeah.
But anyway,
so don't miss it. Don't miss it. Be here next week.
No mixtape is a good mixtape without air supply, though.
Yes, we are all out of time, as they are all out of love.
Nice.
Guys, have a great night, guys. Thanks for coming and hanging out with us at the Casually Serious Podcast, aka TCSP, the mixtape. We are rocking with the classics tonight. Leave us some messages. Come visit us on Facebook. We're also on Instagram. Just look for us on Casually Serious Podcast. You can Google us. Google it. You're going to see this awesome creation that Tammy did for us as our logo. So anyway, folks, you all have a great night. Thanks for hanging out with us. Take care.